Picture a child blowing out birthday candles, a room full of smiling faces, balloons, laughter. Everyone gathered to celebrate one thing: the fact that this person exists. Pause for a moment on that image. What exactly are we celebrating? But here's a stranger question still: did the guest of honor ever agree to attend? Before you dismiss this as philosophical nonsense, consider something uncomfortable. That child, now surrounded by love and cake and flickering candles, will one day suffer. They will experience loss, illness, heartbreak, perhaps betrayal, perhaps worse. At some point, they will lie awake at 3 a.m, confronting the terrifying weight of their own mortality. And yet, before any of this could happen, the decision was made for them by people who loved them. Yes, but by people who could not possibly know what that life would contain. So here's the question no one wants to ask. Is it ethical to create a being who will inevitably suffer without first obtaining their consent? Your instinct is to say yes. Of course, life is worth living. But the obviousness of that answer is precisely what should make us suspicious. Because here's the paradox. The people who argue they should never have been born are not necessarily depressed. Many of them love their lives. They cherish their relationships. They find deep meaning in their work, their art, their connections. And yet they maintain that bringing any new conscious being into existence is a harm. This is not about hating life. It is about the ethics of creating it. What if the case for never having been born is not a symptom of despair, but a conclusion of cold, careful logic? Now, you might think this is some internet-age nihilism, a product of doom scrolling and existential memes, kids who've spent too much time online. But that's not true, not even close. This idea that it might be better never to have existed is ancient, and not just ancient. It was taken seriously by some of the greatest minds who ever lived. There's this Greek myth. King Medicea, the Gold Touch, Gyhe captures Silenus, this wise old companion of Dionysus. And Medes demands an answer. What is the greatest good for humanity? What's the best thing a person can hope for? Silenus laughs. And then he says something chilling. Best of all is never to have been born. Second best is to die soon. This isn't some fringe thought. You find versions of it in Sophocles. In Aristotle, Cicero quoted it. The ancient Greeks, for all their celebration of beauty and heroism, couldn't shake this dark whisper, and they weren't alone. The Hebrew scriptures gave us Ecclesiastes. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. The writer traditionally Solomon looked at everything under the sun and found it wanting, meaningless. Chasing after wind, Buddhism begins with the first noble truth. Life is dukkha, suffering, dissatisfaction. An itch that can never quite be scratched. These aren't marginal beliefs. They're foundational to entire civilizations. Fast forward to the 1800s. Arthur Schopenhauer. Gloomy, brilliant, absolutely miserable at parties, built an entire philosophy around this intuition. He argued that we're all driven by a blind, irrational will to live. We want, we strive, we grasp. And when we get what we want, brief satisfaction, then more wanting. The baseline of existence, he said, is suffering. Happiness is just a temporary interruption, he wrote hand. I love this line. We can regard our life as a uselessly disturbing episode in the blissful repose of nothingness. But Schopenhauer was still a poet in his way. He felt these things more than he proved them. Then came David Benatar. In 2006, the South African philosopher published a book with an audacious title, Better Never to Have Been: The Harm of Coming into Existence. Benatar didn't want to lament. He wanted to prove, through careful, almost clinical logic. He claimed to demonstrate that coming into existence is always, always a harm. Not sometimes. Not for unfortunate people. For everyone. Even the happiest life, he argued, would have been better had it never begun. and the engine of this argument, something called the asymmetry. Okay, here's where it gets uncomfortable. Benatar's argument rests on a simple asymmetry. 4 statements. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Ready? First, the presence of pain is bad, obviously. No one disputes this. Second, the presence of pleasure is good. Also obvious. Third, the absence of pain is good, Evan, if there's no one around to enjoy that absence. Fourth, the absence of pleasure is not bad unless there's someone being deprived of it. Now, the first 2 are symmetrical. Pain bad, pleasure good. Fine, but look at 3 and 4. That's where things get weird. Think about it this way. There are no people living on Mars. Those hypothetical Martians are experiencing no pleasure right now. Is that a tragedy? Are you losing sleep over all the happy Martians that don't exist? No, because there's no one there to be deprived. You can't deprive someone who doesn't exist. But here's the flip side. Those non-existent Martians are also experiencing no suffering. It's no pain, no heartbreak, no cancer, no grief. And that the absence of suffering seems like a good thing. It's not for anyone in particular, just good. So what does this mean for the decision to have a child? Before you conceive, there's a potential person. If you bring them into existence, they will definitely experience some suffering. That's unavoidable. They'll also experience pleasure, sure. But remember, the absence of that pleasure wouldn't have been bad, because there'd be no one to miss it. The absence of their suffering, though, that would have been good. So existence guarantees some bad. Non-existence guarantees no bad. And the missing good isn't actually a loss to anyone. The math, Benatar says, always favors never being born. And then there's the consent problem. Can't ask an unborn child if they want to exist. That's not just difficult, it's logically impossible. So every act of procreation is a gamble. You're betting someone else's entire existence, their capacity for suffering, on your hope that things will work out, and the house always wins some hands. Why does almost everyone assume life is worth living? Well, Benatar has some thoughts on that too. There's something called the Pollyanna principle. We remember good times more vividly than bad ones. We literally reconstruct our memories to be rosier than they were. Then there's adaptation. Humans get used to almost anything. Someone with chronic pain might tell you they're happy. But that doesn't mean the pain isn't bad. It means humans are incredibly good at surviving bad situations. And we always compare our lives to other lives, never to non-existence. How could we? We can't imagine not existing, so we assume existence must be better. But that's not an argument. It's just a failure of imagination. Here's what haunts me about all this. What if the meaning we find in life, the love, the connection, the creative work we're so proud of, what if it's all just a coping mechanism? A way of making peace with the situation we never chose and can never escape. That doesn't mean life doesn't feel worthwhile. It often does. But can the fact that we love living justify imposing life on someone who cannot consent to it? For decades, these ideas lived in dusty philosophy departments, academic conferences, the margins. Not anymore. Something strange is happening. Birth rates are falling across the developed world. Japan, South Korea, Italy, Germany, the United States. Everywhere you look, people are having fewer children, sometimes none at all. Now, economists will tell you it's about money. Housing costs, student debt, the impossibility of raising a family on stagnant wages while everything else gets more expensive. And yeah, that's part of it. But talk to young people. Really talk to them and you'll hear something else. Something deeper. There's this movement called birth striking. Started around 2019, these are people who refuse to have children until governments take serious action on climate change. For some of them, it's political protest, negotiating tactic. But for others, it's something more fundamental. Why would I bring a child into a world of rising seas and mass extinction? A world of resource wars and climate refugees? What kind of love is that? Is it love at all? Or is it cruelty dressed up in nursery colors? And it's not just climate activists. Spend any time online and you'll stumble into anti-natalist communities, Reddit forums, YouTube channels, Discord servers, thousands of people discussing Benatar, debating the ethics of reproduction, sharing their reasons for not having kids. Here's what's interesting. These aren't spaces filled with depressed people. Many of them love their lives. They have friends, hobbies, careers they care about. They're not sitting in dark rooms cursing their parents. They've just followed an argument to its conclusion. The conclusion says, don't create more. Now, let's be fair. There are counter-arguments, serious ones. Some people say, life contains genuine goods, love, beauty, discovery, moments of transcendence that make everything worth it, and that's true. But Benatar would point out that these goods only matter to someone who exists. The non-existent aren't missing out. They're not sitting in some cosmic waiting room, sad about the sunsets they'll never see. Others say suffering can be meaningful. That struggle builds character, creates depth, which makes joy possible. Maybe, but would you deliberately hurt someone just so they could overcome it? Would you break a child's leg so they could experience the growth of physical therapy? And then there's the big one. Humanity must continue. We have a duty to the future, to progress, to the species. But why? Benatar asks. The universe won't mourn us. The stars will keep burning whether humans exist or not. This imperative to continue, is it moral? Or is it just biology whispering in our ear, dressing up instinct as obligation? If Benatar is even partially right, not completely, just partially, the implications are staggering. Every pregnancy becomes an ethical question. Every birth, a gamble made on behalf of someone who cannot consent. And most parents never think about this. Not because they've refuted the argument, because they've never heard it. So where does this leave us? Here's the strange thing about antinatalism. Those of us who find the argument compelling are already here. We can't unbirth ourselves. The door only swings one way. Benatar knows this. He's not telling anyone to end their life. It's a different question entirely, and one he explicitly separates from his argument. Once you exist, you have relationships, attachments, people who would be devastated by your absence. Calculation changes. His point is narrower, and maybe more disturbing for it. Don't start new lives. That's all. But we can't live this philosophy, not fully. We're already on this side of existence, looking back at a threshold we can never recross. So maybe the value isn't in the conclusion. Maybe it's in what the argument reveals about us. We assume existence is a gift. We assume consent doesn't matter before birth. We assume suffering is redeemed by joy, that the good times balance out the bad, that it all means something in the end. Benatar asks us to justify these assumptions. Most of us can't. Think again about those birthday candles. The room full of people celebrating a life that, if Benatar is right, might have been better left unlived. And yet there's laughter in that room. There's warmth. There's love. Is that evidence against Benatar? Or is it evidence of something else? Our desperate, beautiful need to make meaning from a situation we never chose. We didn't ask to be born. None of us did. We can never know what non-existence would have felt like, because it wouldn't have felt like anything. That's perhaps the most unsettling thought of all. The alternative to everything, the suffering, the joy, the confusion, the love, isn't darkness. It isn't peace. It isn't rest. It's nothing. And we will never know whether nothing would have been enough.